Princess Anne is hugely respected and adored.
I seriously owe...
Won't there be media present? Is it a private audience?
Princess Anne is hugely respected and adored.
I seriously owe one very important thank you, which is to my mother and father.
Intrinsic to the royal family, she has been steadfast, but always unique.
She has never tried to be what she is not.
There's no fanfare, no standing on ceremony.
Princess Anne has always done exactly as she pleases, and she doesn't care what other people think about that.
Setting herself apart with a determination to do things her own way.
She wasn't afraid to blaze a trail. She wasn't afraid to not be liked by the media.
Divorce? Never been mentioned by anybody.
Whether she was stunning in the fashion world,
She was a very glamorous royal princess who broke every conceivable fashion rule.
achieving sporting glory,
The Queen, so proud to see her daughter's success.
I would be delighted to get round in one piece.
A thoroughly modern princess.
breaking traditions for her children.
Anne was the first female royal to give birth in hospital. She was offered the titles of Prince and Princess for her children, but she declined them.
Or standing firm in the face of danger.
There has been an assassination attempt on Princess Anne and Mark Phillips.
And he's pointing the gun in the car. He's got Princess Anne by the arm. She just looked at him and went, "Go away, you silly man."
Now 18th in line to the throne, Princess Anne remains one of King Charles's best in command. A trend-setting trailblazer, all on her own terms.
She's the best queen we've never had.
She's not playing a character. She is what she is, and take it or leave it.
For many decades, Princess Anne has been regarded as one of the hardest working royals, notching up hundreds of public appearances every year.
Princess Anne is the trusty anchor of the royal family. She's up to about 22,000 plus engagements that she's done in her lifetime. She is the essence of public duty.
I don't think I've met anyone who's been more dedicated, more loyal, more hardworking. She wanted to plough her own furrow. She wanted to do things her way. And she is authentic, and she's not pretending to be who she isn't.
Not only hardworking, Princess Anne has garnered a reputation for being one of the royal family's biggest rule breakers and trendsetters.
There are so many firsts when it comes to her. The first royal Olympian, the first princess to attend school outside the palace, the first royal divorce in modern times.
Somehow Anne has sort of navigated her way through various crises and emerged into a place where she is probably, after the king, the most important royal figure.
When the baby's parents with Prince Charles drove past, there was naturally a great ovation.
Was it Anne's childhood that set her on the way to becoming a unique and independent royal? When Anne was born, her mother was still Princess Elizabeth. Anne's grandfather, George VI, was ruling as king.
Princess Anne is born 1950. We're in the immediate post-war period. The British monarchy is going through a sort of gentle transformation in these years. It's going from the sort of the pre-Second World War grandiose imperial monarchy to a much more British-centred institution, much more domesticated as well.
For Princess Elizabeth, this was naturally one of the happiest of moments.
On arrival, Anne effectively completes the royal nuclear family. They are the picture-perfect family group. Her, Charles, Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, and of course, Princess Elizabeth.
The harrowing days of national sorrow reach their peak.
Anne, And her family's world transformed in dramatic fashion when the sad news emerged that the king had died. Princess Elizabeth would now be queen.
Following the death of King George VI, the intensity of the media exposure transforms overnight. And suddenly this young family are very much thrust into the limelight. And I imagine that was a challenging thing to have to deal with as little children.
On what must surely be the greatest day of her life, Queen Elizabeth drives to her coronation.
At the time of her mother's coronation, Anne was not yet 3 years old. This young family now faced a huge upheaval.
The Queen had not expected to become Queen at the age of 26. She and Philip hoped they would have a good 10 years in which they hoped to be able to devote themselves to being a mother and father to Anne and Charles. That was cruelly snatched away with the death of King George VI, and that meant sacrifices.
Elizabeth II was a famously absent mother, partly because she was quite aloof and detached in relation to her children, but also her duties called her abroad.
Anne's parents are away for most of her young life. She's not daily being sort of read stories to or bathed by mummy and daddy. That is the 1950s reality for most children. And Anne, as a result, is brought up by a team of staff, governesses, nannies, servants, and her grandparents. This is a very disjointed family.
Prolonged time away from her parents seemed to suit Anne, more so than her older brother, Charles.
Anne clearly dealt with the absence of her parents in a way that perhaps Charles did not. She had something in her character that was quite steely from an early age, whereas Charles was much more clingy and craved attention and praise.
What that leads to in the case of Anne is a growing, perhaps, independence from her family, from her mother and father, perhaps a positive independence, ability to get on with things by herself.
When her parents were back on British soil, Anne formed a close bond with her sharp-witted and no-nonsense father.
Philip's expectations were so searingly high. He had these peerless ideas of masculinity and prowess and bravery and physical accomplishment that really delicate flower Charles was always going to find that a big challenge.
Charles and Anne were very different as children. Charles was very sensitive, quite a quiet and shy little boy. Anne was a real tomboy, outgoing, enthusiastic, energetic, and, it is said, the favourite child of her father.
He adored her. She was very much a daddy's girl in the early years. They were almost mirror images of each other. He used to try to get her over the Buckingham Palace tannoy if he wanted her. He would shout for Sweetie, "Where is Sweetie? Come and save me, Sweetie." And people might have thought he was talking about the Queen, but he wasn't. He was talking about Princess Anne.
From an early age, Anne showed signs of being headstrong. As a teenager, she requested not to be homeschooled, an enormous break from tradition.
Female members of the royal family were always educated at home. Her mother was, her aunt, Princess Margaret, was. But she decided that she wanted to go away to school. She was the first female royal to do so. She went to Benenden and boarded, which paved the way, I think, for the changes in royal childhood down the years.
What's your personal reaction to having the princess come here?
I think it is a very great honour for us, and I hope a great opportunity.
Have you ever expelled a girl?
Never so far.
That was a pretty forward-thinking approach of her time. She saw her brother Charles going off to boarding school, and it was her who went to her parents and made the pitch. You know what? I'd like to go to school too. Why can't I? If the boys can go, if it's good enough for them, why not me?
Anne was originally second in line to the throne after her brother Charles. But as her younger siblings, Andrew and Edward, were born, Anne fell down the pecking order.
It must have been very difficult, always being reminded that you were the spare and you're a girl, so that any other children that your mother might have, you're going to be even less important because you're further away from the throne.
And there is this feeling of, oh, if only Anne had been born first. That's the truth. But the irony is, of course, she still wouldn't have been queen because of primogeniture. Charles was always destined to be king. While today, had William's first child been a girl, she would have become queen, that wasn't the world that Anne was born into. She was born into a world where it was presumed if you were the girl, you were one step behind your brothers.
Was it this that fueled even more independence in Anne?
Once Andrew and Edward were born, Anne became the spare to the spare to the spare. And that gave her a certain degree of freedom within the family, because there weren't the same expectations placed on her. The burden wasn't on her shoulders.
Anne was clear-sighted in terms of what she wanted to do, and I think to a certain extent quite stubborn. She had her eyes set clearly on a different kind of royal life.
Coming up, would the swinging 60s and 70s show a different side to Anne as she began working for the firm?
She drove off to take part in a war game laid on by the regiment in her honour.
She goes to Germany. She fires a submachine gun and she gets in a tank. Whoa, this is an Anne we can understand.
For the royals back in the UK, questions were being asked about Anne's behaviour.
Princess Anne is considered a stalwart of the royal family. Respected and admired, she's a woman who has always played by her own rules.
She's not ashamed of hard work. She doesn't complain. And she does it all with a sort of a very breezy sense of confidence. I mean, she combines, if you like, the very best aspects of her late father and of the late Queen.
Growing up, Anne faced far less pressures than her brothers, who were in front of her in the line to the throne.
Making sure of his place beside his mother, the youngest of the family, Prince Edward, who was 4 in March. Prince Andrew is now 8. Princess Anne will be 18 in August. Prince Charles, 20 this November.
Giving her that bit of freedom when she was younger was probably really good for her in the long run, because she never felt the need to rebel. She never felt the need to go off the reins.
Princess Anne once again bucked the trend in 1968 by not going to university. Instead, she jumped straight into working royal life.
She famously said that university wasn't perhaps not all that it was cracked up to be, and for her, it wasn't what she wanted to do. What does a member of the royal family do whose mother is the Queen? Well, you go into the family business.
I would like to thank you, the Senate, and the people of Berlin for this respect which you have so kindly given me.
Despite her youth and inexperience, Anne was sent on several important royal visits. But one in particular drew attention for all the wrong reasons. When Anne officially joined the firm, the war in Vietnam had been intensifying for more than a decade. To this day, it is considered one of the longest and most brutal periods of warfare. America had sided with the anti-communists, but despite requests for aid, the United Kingdom had refused to send troops of their own.
1970 is an important moment in terms of Anglo-American relations. Famously, the British did not follow the USA into the Vietnam War, and that had caused something of a diplomatic dispute between the two countries. Anne and Charles were sent out to America to really warm this relationship, to ensure its strength going forward.
They toured the capital for a couple of days. They met Richard Nixon. And at the time, she was described as being a bit brusque, a bit blunt with the press. They dubbed her Princess Sourpuss. She said, "I don't do interviews." She was sort of labelled as being standoffish, perhaps even rude.
My sister and I have been looking forward very much to this particular visit.
She probably should have and needed to turn on the charm offensive, but she chose not to.
People couldn't make head nor tail of her and didn't like much what they saw. And I think we felt disappointed. She didn't really work for us on the other side of the pond, where traditionally our royal family has always been welcomed, revered, celebrated.
For the royals back in the UK, questions were being asked about Anne's behaviour.
Was this Anne's inexperience on show? Or was she simply refusing to play by the rules?
She was thrown into this role when she was just 18 and barely out of school. Now, how many of us can think about an 18-year-old, a teenager, undertaking the rigors of royal life? Well, Anne had to do that.
There will be extensive briefing notes about who she's going to see, who she's going to meet, what event she's going to do. Will there be media present? Won't there be media present? Is it a private audience? Is it a public-facing engagement? It is a lot to take on, but I don't think she was in any doubt that this wasn't her destiny, and she didn't know anything different.
Press interest in the Queen's only daughter was immense, but Anne's reception of the media appeared to be thorny at best.
We had a much more aggressive tabloid news culture emerge in the late 1950s, early 1960s, that wanted to sort of pick apart these royal individuals, get behind the scenes, and take a close look at their private lives.
She wasn't an easy adolescent for the press. There was lots about abrasive Anne that was quite hard to love. She appeared, I think, sometimes a little unforgiving and sometimes even petulant. Dare I say it, because I know she's got national treasure status now, but sometimes even a little bit spoiled.
She was invited to see if she could handle a 79-seater double-decker bus. She managed it easily, but said afterwards that she didn't really fancy being a bus driver.
From a young, good-looking, glamorous, beautiful British princess, we expected something more warm and malleable.
A hungry press pack did get a different view of Anne during a trip to Germany.
She seemed to get a bit more stuck in on this one, so sort of riding tanks and getting involved with all the fun things. I think that tour probably played more to her strengths.
And then, without a perceptible lurch, she drove off to take part in a war game laid on by the regiment in her honour.
She goes to Germany. She fires a submachine gun and she gets in a tank. And, of course, Anne's in a happy place. Whoa! Cold War, here we got it. Woman taking the fight to the men. This is an Anne we can understand.
She was delighted, and so was the Sergeant Major, who said she was a fantastic driver.
In the right environment, Anne really works. And that example of Anne in Germany versus Anne in America speaks to where she was successful and where she wasn't.
Princess Anne's public persona hadn't been what people were expecting.
For some reason, Princess Anne didn't seem particularly entranced by her outing.
In wanting to walk her own path, was the young royal princess rubbing the press up the wrong way.
There aren't many members of the royal family that would say they love the press and the media, but there's an acceptance that the media is there to cover the good work that they're doing. So there is that kind of polite relationship between the two. But Princess Anne perhaps didn't follow those conventions. It was, frankly, as far as she was concerned, none of their business.
She also kept up a fair pace, reducing most of her followers to panting wrecks. My impression was that she enjoyed that part too.
She didn't like the public attention, and it was clear she didn't like the public attention. And this distance between her and the media initially seemed like it was going to be a problem.
In order to lay down a marker for her children, Queen Elizabeth II took Anne and Charles, along with Philip, on a tour of Australia and New Zealand.
It marked an important moment in a shift in Anne's demeanour. Following the negative press coverage with the US tour, this charm offensive in Australia was really defined by a new approach in terms of royal public relations. For the first time, we saw members of the royal family going out and greeting, often shaking hands with members of the crowd.
That was famous because it was the scene of the very first royal walkabout. Not only was Anne trying to work out what her royal role was and what royal life was going to be like, but so too were the Queen and Prince Philip. What was the dynamic going to be? Were they going to do things together as a foursome, or were they going to split up? So there were all sorts of things going on slightly below the surface on that tour.
And then came a trip that dramatically changed everything for Anne.
Princess Anne's tour of Africa was hugely important for the continent at the time, but for Princess Anne as well. What they saw was a different side to Princess Anne, someone who was funny and really down to earth. She slept in refugee camps, she visited people who had typhoid, malaria. She travelled 14,000 miles over the course of this trip, raising awareness about causes that she was really passionate about. And in fact, when she was told that this tour would be far too dangerous, her reply was, "Damn them, I'm going." And she did.
This was one of the turning points. We liked her independence. We liked the fact that she kicked against the traces and she was not going to be told what to do or bossed about by anyone.
Had Princess Anne's willingness to do things her own way brought her a new level of respect.
She wasn't afraid to blaze a trail. She wasn't afraid to not be liked by the media. And what she was all about was doing the work of the royal family. That's what was most important to her, rather than perhaps her reputation or how she was written about in the press.
Princess Anne didn't want to pretend to be anything that she wasn't, which I think makes her incredibly authentic and genuine. She's not playing to the cameras. She's not playing a character. She is what she is, and take it or leave it.
By her late teens, Anne was already a royal rule breaker, but she soon became, quite literally, a trendsetter.
The swinging 60s, as they would later become known, were this fascinating time in Britain's cultural and social history where things were changing rapidly. It was the era of the Beatles, The Who, the Rolling Stones. This was a period where inhibitions were being lifted, where there were new opportunities to express oneself.
We're so used nowadays to think of Anne as being on the conservative side of the royal fashion parade. But really, she was a rule breaker. In the 60s and particularly in the 1970s, she set the trend in terms of the clothes she wore, the Mary Quant and flower power generation. Well, she symbolized that.
With an expressive freedom, Anne combined high-end fashion alongside her more traditional working royal wardrobe.
She really leans in to the changes in fashion, and she would become the first member of the British royal family to wear, famously, a miniskirt.
On the one hand, you might see her in the latest miniskirt with bright, flowery prints. And the next day, you would find her dressed in a military uniform. She was a very glamorous royal princess who broke every conceivable fashion rule.
She really sort of straddled tradition and modernity and sort of brought this kind of popular, early influencer, kind of celebrity feel to the royal family.
On her 21st birthday, she appeared on the cover of Vogue, and over the 1970s, she made 3 appearances on the cover of Vogue, the fashion Bible, and this was unprecedented.
Anne's foray into the fashion world had been unexpected, but some say her attitudes towards clothing have inspired future generations.
She was quite ahead of her time. When other royals had a new outfit for every single engagement, Princess Anne would wear things more than once. Sustainable fashion, she was doing that back in the 70s when it wasn't trendy. And so I think that really earned her fashion stripes.
There is no doubt that Anne, at the end of the 1960s and 70s, was seen as a very stylish adornment to the royal family who would help perhaps diffuse its somewhat stuffy attitude that it had at that time.
Coming up, Anne's true passion lay in a very dangerous sport. But was she biting off more than she could chew?
Anne's sporting craze with horses was considered somewhat unusual, partly because it took up a significant amount of her time as a younger woman, but more seriously was the danger involved.
Princess Anne had been thrown and the horse had fallen on her. The princess, unconscious, as officials anxiously summoned an ambulance.
A steadfast and well-regarded member of the firm, Anne forged her own path. And by the time she was 21 years old, she had bucked many of the trends associated with being a young royal. And her horse riding career was going from strength to strength.
Anne's first love, last love, every love has always been horses. It's easy to look at the modern royal generation with all their jobs now. It's easy to forget that actually Anne probably was the first working royal to also have a job. She really did pave the way for royals to have proper jobs because she managed to combine work and pleasure in one form.
The fact that Anne was such a competitively good equestrian at such a young age, I think indicates a certain strength of character, a certain determination, a certain approach to life, to hard work, that marks her out, perhaps from her siblings.
Not only was she excelling as an equestrian, the princess was also juggling a demanding training schedule with her day job as a senior working royal.
She was able to work for the royal family, go out on royal engagements with Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth II, and she would use the evenings to practice equestrianism. That's what made her happy.
At a farm near Windsor today, as with almost every other day since she came back from the Far East, Princess Anne has been riding with Doublet. The princess is working back to fitness and accepting no more official engagements other than those already agreed to.
Some years ago, I remember one of the grooms at Windsor Castle telling me how, as a young man, he remembered on a Sunday, the Queen always had to send someone down to the stables to get Anne, as he put it, out from underneath a horse to get changed for church. And this happened all the time.
And her hard work paid off. In 1971, Princess Anne won gold at the European Championships.
She won 1 gold medal and 2 silver medals at the European Equestrian Championships.
She was the face of British equestrianism. She was a highly decorated equestrian, winning medals in European championships.
Anne's grandfather, King George VI, had famously played at Wimbledon. Her great-uncle, the former King Edward VIII, later Duke of Windsor, he was a famously good golfer, also a keen horseman. But no member of the British royal family had enjoyed the level of success at an international sporting level that Anne had.
In the same year, she made history when one of Britain's highest sporting honours was bestowed on her, winning the BBC Sports Personality of the Year.
Let's remember that she was only 21 years old when this happened.
The first member of the British royal family to get that award. She's breaking new ground here. And what's more, we're seeing a leading member of the British royal family become a kind of sporting celebrity, something we haven't really been accustomed to in the 20th century.
But horse trials came with their own perils.
I consider it a dangerous sport. You're riding a big, strong horse at speed. Anything can happen. Anne had some spectacular falls over the years.
And at the Portman Horse Trials in Dorset in 1976, Anne suffered a nasty accident.
Princess Anne had been thrown as Candlewick failed to clear a fence and the horse had fallen on her. The princess, unconscious, was covered over with blankets as officials anxiously summoned an ambulance.
More seriously was the danger involved. I think had she been first in line to the throne, I think more concerns, more questions would have been raised about her participation.
Following her accident, Anne made a full recovery and joined the best athletes in the world to represent her country.
I would be delighted to get round in one piece and having not made a total nitwit of myself, but naturally one would like to take a gold medal home as well.
In 1976, Princess Anne became the first member of the royal family to compete in the Olympic Games in Montreal. This was really groundbreaking. No member of the royal family had ever done this. No member of the royal family had been good enough to compete professionally.
I think her incredible sporting career has reflected beautifully on the monarchy as a whole and the country. You know, how wonderful to have a member of the royal family representing your country at an Olympic sport.
Princess, European champion and Olympian Anne was leaving her mark on the monarchy's legacy. And her love of horse riding also led her to romance.
Anne and Mark met at the 1968 Olympic weeks in Mexico, but it wasn't until 4 years later, in 1972, that they became an item.
Captain Mark Phillips was a lieutenant in the Queen's Regiment. He was a British Army officer, and he was a well-known equestrian sportsman. He was a renowned Olympian, and I suppose it's no surprise that he crosses paths with Princess Anne through this shared interest in equestrian sports.
I think it was inevitable that when Anne was, if you like, looking for love, she was going to be attracted to men who rode horses.
But the notoriously private Anne was determined to keep her personal life out of the spotlight.
Anne wanted to keep her relationship with Mark Phillips secret because she didn't want the press to feast on it. Her dislike of the press is legendary, and she didn't want us to be part of it.
Princess Anne, in an effort to keep their relationship private, used to have Mark Phillips moved around in a horse box so they can meet wherever they wanted.
Eventually, though, news of the couple's relationship did become public, and their engagement was officially announced.
When the couple appeared on the lawns of Buckingham Palace just before lunch, the long months of rumour, speculation and denial were over. The Easter engagement was now public knowledge.
Very close to the eve of her engagement to Mark Phillips in 1973, the press got wind that that an engagement was coming, and Buckingham Palace flatly denied it. They then subsequently announced it. There was an uproar that the palace had lied, but in fact it turned out that the palace actually didn't know because Anne hadn't told them, and she didn't really feel it was anybody's business.
Has it been a great strain keeping it secret and indeed keeping it away from people like ourselves?
I think it has, yes, it became rather a strain, yeah.
Princess Anne was breaking tradition by marrying a commoner, Captain Mark Phillips, an army officer, but a rising star in the equestrian world.
I think some members of the royal family cocked a little bit of an eyebrow at her marrying him.
He was a bit of a wimp, Mark Phillips. Philip always called him foggy because he was damp and wet. That's what Philip said.
When you were a teenager, did you have any idea of the sort of girl that you would like to marry?
No, no, I didn't. I wasn't very clever with girls, I don't think, when I was a teenager.
He didn't have the character, the personality of Anne. She was much tougher and stronger than him.
There were questions about power dynamic between the two of them.
You see Anne being interviewed and asked about her future domestic role as the wife of Mark Phillips.
Do you think you'll make a good housewife? I mean, can you cook, for example?
Well, it's hardly up to me to say either.
Scrambled eggs, I think we can recommend this.
Yes, I mean, I've done a bit of cooking myself.
We look at that, we think, but hang on a minute, she's also a European champion, this accomplished horsewoman. But I don't think she'll have come away from that interview, or indeed any other interview, thinking, oh, God, typical, I've just been pigeonholed as a woman. I think in many respects, she enjoyed being an exceptional woman within an exceptionally traditional family.
Mark Phillips was a good choice for a member of this particular generation of the royal family. He was a commoner, so this was a way for the British royal family to demonstrate outwardly that they were in touch with ordinary Britons. But equally, he was someone who aligned himself with the culture and social interests of the aristocratic British royal family. He was famously an equestrian. He was of the British military. He could be relied on in terms of his dutiful behaviour, his royalism.
When the engagement was announced, I kind of wondered what the wedding would be like, because I wouldn't have thought Anne would have wanted a big fuss. But being the Queen's only daughter and being the first of the Queen's children to get married, they had to make a big deal of it, and so they did.
And in November 1973, an estimated 500 million people watched around the world as Princess Anne married Mark Phillips in a ceremony full of firsts.
Princess Anne's wedding was unique in the sense that she was the Queen's only daughter. It was the first wedding that would be televised in colour. People also got a bank holiday for Princess Anne's wedding as well. And in some ways, it was a traditional royal wedding. She wore her mum's tiara. There was 2,000 guests in attendance.
She was the person that started the hysteria about royal weddings because we hadn't seen anything like it before. She arrived at Westminster Abbey in a glass carriage.
Princess Anne's wedding was a real opportunity for the royal family to show their relevance, why they were there, to get popularity. Everyone loves a royal wedding.
But the pomp and ceremony of a royal wedding appeared to be at odds with Anne's no-frills personality.
For Anne, it was a very kind of no-fuss affair.
I am Elizabeth Alice Louise.
Take thee, Mark Antony Peter.
Take thee, Mark Antony Peter.
She chose a designer that she'd worn a lot before and since, Maureen Baker. It was an off-the-peg wedding dress. Very different from, say, David Emanuel, who designed Princess Diana's mammoth dress and train, or Sarah Burton for Alexander McQueen, who designed Kate, Duchess of Cambridge, wedding dress, or even Claire White-Keller, who designed Meghan Markle's wedding dress for Givenchy. She only had one bridesmaid who was a 9-year-old cousin. If you compare that to Princess Diana, she had 5 bridesmaids. Princess of Wales had 4. The Duchess of Sussex had 6. So, you know, definitely more pared back than that.
The wedding cake itself had been decorated by the army culinary team. And you got glimpses of the kind of marriage she would have wanted to have.
It was a spectacular day with subtle down-to-earth touches, ensuring the newly married princess did things her own way.
So it's that dichotomy of Anne that she absolutely understood that her wedding was not just hers. It was a royal spectacle. It was the pomp, the pageantry. But equally, she didn't really want to fuss too much over it.
Coming up, a terrifying incident nearly costs Anne her life.
The whole concept of police protection around the royal family changed that day.
There has been an assassination attempt on Princess Anne and Mark Phillips.
This was a really serious breach of security and a really shocking attempt on Princess Anne's life.
Princess Anne remains a pillar of the royal family, celebrated for doing things her own way.
She rebels against tradition and protocol when it really matters and because it's more practical to do so. She's a trailblazer in the fact that she has never been cowed by her position. She's never fitted into a certain role or stereotype. She has done things her way. She has made her own path.
She fortunately fitted the role that she was born into. And I would say, if you compare her to all 3 of her brothers, none are as well suited as hand in glove to their role.
And now the princess was married to a fellow Olympian and horse rider, Mark Phillips. But in 1974, their romantic peace was shattered.
There has been an assassination attempt on Princess Anne and Mark Phillips, but the couple escaped unhurt. 4 people, however, were shot and injured when their car was ambushed near Buckingham Palace.
In terrifying events, an attempt was made on Princess Anne's life when a gunman named Ian Ball held her car up at gunpoint on the Mall.
Princess Anne and Mark Phillips were on the way home from an event to Buckingham Palace.
In close attendance, Sergeant Beaton, who'd just been appointed as bodyguard to the princess.
There wasn't a royal convoy. She only had 1 bodyguard.
She hadn't been married long to Mark Phillips, and she was driving down the Mall, and a car had pulled across them, and a guy jumped out waving not 1 gun, but 2.
One of the first people to witness trouble was ex-boxer Ron Russell, who was driving past Clarence House on his way home.
I'm heading down the Mall. Traffic was coming on towards me. I saw just coming was then the royal car, and I thought, oh, I wonder who this is. And I tried to cop a look. So I'm looking, and then a white car pulled out behind it, pulled down head on towards me, cut across the front of the royal car. It's all brakes on and everything like that. So I thought, trouble here.
The gunman opened fire, shooting a nearby police officer and Princess Anne's bodyguard and her driver.
Anne's bodyguard threw himself in front of the door. He was shot 3 times. He was shot in the hand, he was shot in the arm, and he was shot in the chest.
Ian Ball was pointing the gun in the car. He's got Princess Anne by the arm, and he's going, "Come on, Anne, you've got to come. You know you've got to come."
The gunman, Ian Ball, wanted to kidnap her and was going to demand a ransom of £2 million. He ordered her to get out of the royal limousine.
Ron was the only person standing between the princess and the man attempting to take her.
I leant into the car. I got Princess Anne by the forearms. I lifted her out of the car and held her in front of me. And I said, "We're going to walk away, and it's going to have to go through me to get you." And at that point, Mark Phillips has seen him come round behind me and then just dragged her back into the car. So suddenly now, she weren't there, only me. I turn around, I look at him and pointing his gun and the most glary look in his eyes, and I thought, he's got a gun, I've got this, so which one's going to come out best? And I hit him very, very hard. He went down, and by this time there was police cars and everything arriving in every direction.
After the shooting, the Mall is completely closed off here tonight. Up behind me here, several dozen police cars. I gather about 100 policemen drafted in from all over central London.
And amidst it all, Princess Anne kept her cool in the face of danger.
This guy, Ian Ball, he was trying to tell her to get out of the car. She very calmly told him that, she was going nowhere. And I remember she did an interview with Parkinson later about what happened. And she said, "We had a conversation about where we were and weren't going. And I wasn't getting out of the car."
Well, he said I had to go with him. Can't remember why.
I don't think you really gave a reason why. No, perhaps not. But you were quite obstinate about it.
I said I didn't think I wanted to go. Thank you very much.
I've never known a person like her, because at that moment, she just looked at him and went, "Go away, you silly man." That was it.
And Ron was awarded the George Medal for Bravery, where he was personally thanked by the Queen.
The Queen leant forward with the medal to put it on my lapel. And she went, "This medal, looking me straight in the eyes, thanks you as the Queen of England. But I want to thank you as Anne's mother."
The royal couple had managed to survive a horrific kidnap attempt, the likes of which the monarchy had never seen before.
This was a really serious breach of security and a really shocking attempt on Princess Anne's life. And I think it was actually miraculous that neither she nor her bodyguard or her driver or Mark Phillips were killed in this event.
It was unbelievable that there was anyone protection-wise there. There was only James Beaton in the car. There was no police.
Up until then, no one had ever had a go at anyone in the royal family. No one had tried to hurt them. And so their security was really lax.
Since the attack on the couple yesterday evening, a special pre-arranged security plan has been in operation. The whole of the Sandhurst grounds have now been closed to the public for the time being. Extra police are guarding their home, and armed troops are patrolling the grounds.
It was a huge wake-up call in terms of the protection of the royal family. The whole concept of police protection around the royal family changed that day.
It changed the way the royal family was guarded. It changed the security around the royal family.
Now, there'll be at least 3 police protection officers. There'll be outriders, there'll be a backup or even 2 backup cars, there'll be armed police officers.
Anne and Mark settled into married life and soon welcomed 2 children. A son, Peter, arrived in 1977.
2-day-old Master Phillips was carried out by Sister Delphine Stevens, the midwife who was present at the birth.
Her daughter, Zara, followed 4 years later in 1981. And the princess continued to break the royal mould.
Before leaving, the princess stopped to thank the midwives and staff.
Captain Phillips, hidden behind the nurses, leant forward and gave his daughter a rather bemused smile.
Anne was the first female royal to give birth in hospital. Previously, all female royals had given birth at home, obviously with the Queen at Clarence House or Buckingham Palace. And in very Anne tradition, she's just, no, not for me. She very sensibly wanted to be in hospital because, of course, if something goes wrong, you obviously want the best medical care, doctors and nurses around to save both you and the baby's life. Princess Anne said she wanted to treat her birth just like any normal, regular citizen would. I think she also appreciated the privacy that a hospital would give her.
The grandchild of a reigning sovereign was born a commoner. Nevertheless, Peter is fifth in line in succession to the throne.
And though both of her children were born to a princess, neither hold royal titles.
When Princess Anne gave birth to her two children, to Zara and to Peter, she was offered the titles of Prince and Princess by Queen Elizabeth II for her children, but she declined them. And she said, that she wanted them to be able to make their own way in the world.
She very shrewdly reckoned that because of where her position was and where she was likely to end up when her children were adult, that they were never going to need to be working royals. And therefore, what need had they of a prince or princess title?
She's always talked about, it's not easy to have a title, and she knew what that meant for their lives.
They would have a much easier life as ordinary citizens, if you like, than burdened by a title.
But cracks in her relationship started to show when details of her personal life began to spill out into the open.
Not long after the birth of Zara, rumours started to become rife about the state of the marriage between Anne and Mark Phillips. They were rarely seen together, they were living separate lives. He was spending large parts of the year abroad. There were rumours of infidelity on both sides.
He certainly had an eye for the ladies. For certain members of the aristocracy, the marriage vows are just a piece of paper. I think it was very difficult when their marriage foundered.
Whispers of divorce were rife, though true to form, Anne gave nothing away.
Divorce? Never been mentioned by anybody.
In 1989, Princess Anne and Mark Phillips announced that they were separating. There was no plans to divorce at this time, but this would have been probably quite devastating and humiliating for Princess Anne. This is not a first that she wanted to have on her record. She didn't want to be the first of the Queen's children to get divorced.
Traditionally, when members of the royal family have separated, there's an announcement from the palace that there is no plans to divorce.
It was easier to say publicly that Anne and Mark Phillips had separated in order to prepare the British public for the worst news to come.
News spread of her husband's illicit affair, one with a shocking outcome.
When it emerged that he had had a love child with a New Zealand artist, the press coverage of that very much upset Princess Anne.
The princess has braved the cameras before at times of trouble, but today the strain appeared to be showing. Heather Tonkin claims Captain Phillips and she had a brief affair 6 years ago, which resulted in the birth of her daughter Felicity.
Coming up, all eyes on Anne when she's the victim of a notorious theft.
Princess Anne had private letters stolen from her briefcase in Buckingham Palace, and these letters were given to the Sun newspaper.
It did reveal an affair between the princess and her mother's aide.
Scotland Yard said tonight that inquiries here at Buckingham Palace into the theft of the letters are continuing.
For Princess Anne to be caught having an affair with one of the Queen's staff, definitely hugely embarrassing.
Princess Anne is consistently regarded as one of the public's most loved royals. But as a royal rule breaker, her years of tireless work have not been without blemish. In 1989, there was bombshell news that Anne was separating from her husband, Mark Phillips.
Captain Phillips is presumed to have spent the day inside the family home, Gatcombe Park in Gloucestershire. He'll soon be moving out, but will live nearby so that he can continue to see his children and run the estate.
Although separated, Anne made clear there would be no divorce. But earlier that year, the marriage had been under even more strain due to the discovery of private letters between her and another man.
Love letters were stolen from a briefcase at Buckingham Palace. They were passed to the Sun newspaper, who then passed them on to the police. The exact letters and their contents weren't ever published. They were seen as being too hot to handle.
Alone today at her Gloucestershire home, Gatcombe Park, the Princess Royal has said nothing about the letters stolen from Buckingham Palace. They're now known to have been written by this man, Commander Timothy Lawrence.
The discovery of the letters had exposed a relationship between Anne and a member of Buckingham Palace staff, Timothy Lawrence.
Timothy Lawrence was a former naval officer at this point, working for the Queen in his capacity as equerry.
It was quite clear from the coverage at the time that this was no ordinary friendship. There was a deep affection between the two.
I think she would have been absolutely devastated. It was detrimental to the monarchy and to the institution. She's not a Kardashian, she's not, a celebrity. She's a working member of the royal family, and no one wants their love life splattered all over the tabloids.
But the damage was done. The letters had exposed Anne's affair and revealed the true state of her marriage. Coupled with details of Mark's infidelities, it spelt one end for their relationship.
The Princess Royal has been granted her divorce from Captain Mark Phillips. The quickie divorce was uncontested and officially ends the 19-year marriage.
It was an unwanted record. Anne became the first of the Queen's children to divorce. In a year largely considered the worst on record for the monarchy.
It has turned out to be an annus horribilis.
1992 saw the collapse of 3 of her children's marriages and a devastating fire at Windsor Castle.
Fire has crowned an unhappy year for the royal family. An entire section of Windsor Castle has been badly damaged.
But despite her divorce, Anne didn't suffer the same media scrutiny as her siblings. Had her years of doing her own thing and distancing herself from the press worked to her advantage?
She came away from that relatively unscathed. Her reputation absolutely still intact. I think this is because we didn't really have sort of the fallout that we had with Prince Charles and Princess Diana, where they were on the front pages of the newspapers literally every day.
I think there was a great deal of sympathy for Anne's position. She had been betrayed by Mark Phillips. I think the public view was if she's got another shot at happiness, then she should be allowed to get on with it.
I don't think Anne cared much about what people thought of her relationship with Timothy Lawrence. I remember as a reporter we were trying to get information at the time about what had gone on, and we went to somewhere, I think he had a place in Winchester, and we went there, and apparently Anne had been going to the house every weekend for months and months and months. And we all said to the neighbours, why didn't you say to anyone? They said, well, they just looked so happy. And that's just interesting, isn't it? That people wanted her to be happy.
The public were in support of the relationship with Timothy Lawrence. But as the Supreme Governor of the Church of England, allowing the divorced princess to remarry presented the Queen with a problem. So, the monarch allowed her daughter to have a wedding that broke all the rules, to the delight of the world's media.
It's supposed to be a private family occasion at Balmoral today, but even Japanese television are here. The royal family, or most of it at least, are due at the church at 3 o'clock this afternoon.
Anne was able to travel north of the border to Scotland. She wasn't married in a Church of England service, but instead married in a Church of Scotland service to Timothy Lawrence. This is a bending of the rules, and I think it points to the fact that Elizabeth II's personal attitude has softened somewhat. It was something that Anne could do, whereas previous royals couldn't have done.
Anne became the first senior member of the modern British monarchy allowed to remarry, in a ceremony that would break the mould of a royal wedding.
It was, on the Princess Royal's insistence, a private family occasion at Cratty Church today, a church just outside Balmoral Castle, and one she's been going to since she was a small child.
She wore sort of a white midi dress, and she had a very, very simple bouquet which had heather in it. And heather, you know, is good luck in Scotland. She had a bit of it in her famous beehive as well.
Didn't know one of those was going to be on.
Very simple, very elegant, very Princess Anne.
It's interesting that her second marriage, her marriage to Timothy Lawrence, was in complete contrast to the first one. She was determined that no one else was going to be involved in this. She was determined that she wasn't going to share it with the world.
Here we go.
Landing loads of pieces both. The last one is a single man.
Mark versus Tim speak to the two different eras of Anne. One, Anne, the young girl trying to find herself and falling in love with a showy bloke. And latterly then Anne, who realises what she needs in a man: support, continuity, reliability and love.
That's good.
I love Tim Lawrence. I absolutely do. When I worked in the Ministry of Defence Press Office, I knew him when he was a naval officer still serving. He's really genuine, like her. And it's lovely watching them behind the scenes. And he's a real support to her.
This is the love of her life. And maybe the Queen was this time giving her the wedding she wanted. She made that possible for her.
Although Anne's divorce had been a significant factor in the Queen's annus horribilis, the monarch granted her the right to marry the man she wanted. Was this unique bond between mother and daughter driven by a shared commitment to royal duty?
I think Princess Anne was so well respected by Queen Elizabeth II because she had such a hard work ethic. She just got on with it.
Sometimes she can do 5, 6, 7 events in one day. So it will be finishing one and then prepping for the next one. She's just extraordinary. I think she's got a Duracell battery in her.
Always determined to go the extra mile, Anne is patron of more than 300 good causes, most famously acting as president for Save the Children, breaking down barriers by actively using her platform to address the nation in support of the charity.
For 75 years, we've helped combat starvation. Weight goes on.
She became patron when she was just 19 in 1970, and she has continued to work for them to this day.
This hospital in Gorham was one of the first places that the Save the Children Fund worked in. In fact, they established the Mother and Child Clinic and built up the hospital.
For that work, she was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize.
The princess remains the only member of the royal family to have received this honour. Her important role in the monarchy meant her mother, the Queen, was increasingly relying on Anne.
The Princess Royal. Which I seriously owe one very important thank you, which is to my mother and father. Thanks to their example, their advice and their help that you're all here tonight.
She was close to the Queen. She understood how hard the Queen's job was. She saw what it took.
The relationship between Princess Anne and the late Queen was absolutely extraordinary. Certainly behind the scenes, the warmth, the clear love, the mutual respect for both of them. Very, very, very warm, very, very, very genuine.
Their special relationship would continue right up until the Queen passed away in September 2022, with her daughter by her side in her final moments.
Princess Anne happened to be visiting Balmoral at that time. I think the Queen had lost consciousness, but Anne stayed by her bedside all the time. And she was there when the Queen died. That really speaks to the strength of their bond, the strength of their relationship, and how important it was that Princess Anne was the one who was with the Queen in her last hours. She was the one that signed the death certificate. As she left the Queen's bedroom, she was obviously looking very upset. I was told later that a senior member of staff said to her, "Would you like a hug?" And she said yes. And they had a hug. And then Princess Anne apparently said to the member of staff, "Thank you. And this will never happen again." Which I thought was rather lovely, actually, thanking them for the warmth and affection, but also she's still the Princess Royal and she doesn't do hugs.
That mutual respect and admiration wasn't necessarily demonstrated overtly, but was very much there. And it was Anne who accompanied her on her final journey, leaving Balmoral Castle and heading to Edinburgh to lie in state there. Anne's final act of dedication to her mother, an honour and a privilege as she described it, but very fitting and showing of that mother-daughter bond.
Coming up, with Charles as king, what role would Anne play in the new royal family?
Even though she's 18th in line to the throne, she's one of the group of people that can step in for King Charles III.
Charles literally couldn't be without her, and she advises him in a way that probably no one else can or will, or would dare to.
In breaking from traditions and rules, Princess Anne has set new standards, making her well-loved by the British public.
Princess Anne's work ethic is clearly right up there. I mean, she just gets on with it. And she also clearly enjoys what she's doing. She does have that blend of slight royal rebel doing things her own way with that bedrock, very sort of stiff, you know, slightly old-fashioned devotion to duty, British way of doing things. And that sense of putting on a good show is still very important.
Hello there. Who has got a spare hand?
And Anne's command of respect through doing things her own way has also extended to her brother, Charles, now that he is king.
Charles literally couldn't be without her. He trusts her implicitly. They get on like a house on fire. They adore each other. And she advises him in a way that probably no one else can or will, or would dare to.
He definitely sought her counsel on problems like Prince Andrew, how to deal with that issue. And I think it's clear that, you know, along with Prince William, Princess Anne is definitely one of King Charles III's trusted advisors.
Anne's crucial role in the new family hierarchy was best demonstrated in early 2024, when the King and Princess of Wales were unable to work due to their devastating cancer diagnoses.
Both were removed from the royal stage for a considerable period of time. But we've kind of got used to it, really, that Anne will always be there and picking up the pieces.
Travelling around the UK on behalf of her brother, upholding his causes, including supporting sustainability initiatives.
A bigger one? Even though she's 18th in line to the throne, she is a Councillor of State, so she's one of the group of people that can step in for King Charles III if he's unable to perform his constitutional duties. And that's where we saw the Princess Royal really stepping up and stepping into those shoes, which she has done all along anyway, but taking on even more engagements. And she's just a real backbone for the royal family.
And despite her high-profile royal role, she remains determined to do things her own way, maintaining a famously low-maintenance lifestyle. Most at home, tending to her horses, chickens, and dogs on her estate in the Cotswolds.
It's a gift from the Queen, and it is thought she must have spent about £800,000 on it, 1,300 acres of beautiful countryside.
The wonderful thing about Gatcombe Park is that it provides Princess Anne with her her personal space. She can go and muck out the horses if she wants to. She can almost take her tiara off at the gates and put on her headscarf and be a working member of the estate enjoying herself.
She and Zara and Peter, and now obviously Mike Tyndall, and Peter's daughters and Mike and Zara's 3 children, they are very, very close. They all live on the Gatcombe estate. She babysits the grandchildren. She's taught her 5 grandchildren to ride. She is never happier than mucking out the stables with her staff.
How does it feel having a Buckingham Palace as your private property?
Well, I don't know, because it isn't.
Princess Anne has broken rules, defied expectations, but somehow has steered away from controversy. As both a royal princess and national treasure,
Yes, it is.
she continues to be well loved by the British public, approaching everything with humour, duty, and hard work.
I think as a woman, they probably expected her just to be quiet, get married. No, that was never going to be her. She carved her own path like no other within the royal family.
She is a real kind of contradiction of protocol stickler, but royal rule book breaker, because she has done things her own way.
She is undoubtedly a trailblazer. She has been a trendsetter, and she's been a rule breaker. She has been a royal princess very much on her terms. The thing about Princess Anne is, and a lot of people have said this over the years, is she's the best queen we've never had.
It was an utter privilege to be Princess Anne's press secretary and to work with her for 13 years. She'd hear me praising her and she'd absolutely hate it. She'd want to say, "Shut up, Ailsa, you're talking nonsense," or something. She hates all that praise. So, ma'am, if you're watching, I apologise for anything that I've said.